Hello, and welcome to the thousands of Women's Network's members, allies, and clients who are joining us today from around the globe for our International Women's Day celebration. Please note this call is being recorded. All lines have been placed on mute, and live captioning is available. We encourage you to engage with our speakers and participants via the chat feature. We invite you to share takeaway points to your social media platforms and include hashtag IWD, hashtag CBRE Women, hashtag Be Bold, and your local chapter. I would now like to welcome Brooke Armstrong, President, Advisory Services for Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, and America's Women's Network Board member. Brooke, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello and welcome to all of our colleagues and clients around the globe. We could not be more excited to celebrate International Women's Day with you all. This is truly a global event, and we love seeing where everyone is from in the chat. So please let us know where you're listening from. International Women's Day is about recognizing the incredible achievements of women, acknowledging their contributions, and celebrating the community that exists between women everywhere. Our theme this year is accelerating action and accelerating empowerment. The spirit behind this theme is bold and urgent action, which is both exciting and inspiring. We are lucky at CBRE at an organization that allows us to thrive in an environment that supports belonging and provides advancement based on merit. We have so many achievements to celebrate, but of course there's always more to do. We will look to build on that success into the future. This International Women's Day is particularly special. It is the 25th anniversary of the Women's Network in the Americas at CBRE, and we are so proud of our long history and continued growth. Our pillars of mentorship, connection, growth, and advocacy have evolved over time and kept us focused on our mission, advancing the success of women. Not just women at CBRE, not just women in real estate, not just women in business, but advancing the success of all women. This is also a special celebration today because for the first time, we've welcomed our valued clients to our offices around the country to share International Women's Day with us. We are so glad to see you. We're so grateful for your partnership and for trusting in CBRE, and we cannot wait to share this exciting keynote address with you and our colleagues globally today. On behalf of our esteemed Women's Network Chair, Lauren Crowley-Cornett, I would like to also thank the Women's Network Advisory Board and CBRE's leadership team for their support in making today possible. And our keynote speaker, of course, Sally Sussman, for joining us on this very special day. I would also like to remind everyone that our sister women's networks in the UK and APAC are also hosting events today that are open to all of us and are posted on the internet for everyone to share. This is a special community, 25 years strong, with so much to be proud of. And today is a special moment to celebrate our success and look to the future. And now I would like to welcome Marianne Tai, CEO of the Tri-State region, to introduce our keynote speaker, client and author, Sally Sussman. Marianne, over to you.
Hello to all our friends, clients, and colleagues from around the world. This is truly a special day because we celebrate the countless achievements women have made in fields from science and medicine to business, government, academia, and so on. It's also a day when we pledge to redouble our own efforts to empower more women to make gains of their own. If you're looking for someone to emulate, we have one in today's keynote speaker. Sally Sussman is a global strategist, a big thinker, peerless communicator, and most recently, a captivating author. I've known and admired Sally for many years. I first met her in her role as Estee Lauder's Executive Vice President of Global Communications, and now in her current position as Pfizer's Executive Vice President and Chief Corporate Affairs Officer. Sally was also a long-serving member of the WPP Board, global strategic marketing firm, who also happens to have been a longtime CBRE customer. I've watched Sally transition flawlessly from the beauty business to the pharmaceutical industry, mastering two entirely different languages, yet speaking both eloquently. In her book, Breaking Through, she shares her principles for opening hearts, moving minds, and bringing about positive change. Sally and her communications team at Pfizer put those very principles to work under the most extraordinary circumstances, the crucible of the COVID pandemic. Sally demonstrates how her principles, from embracing candor to clarifying intentions to connecting with humility, can make all of us more persuasive and effective communicators. So with that, thank you for being here. Sally, take it away.
Thank you so much, Marianne. I really am humbled by your introduction. And I actually remember the very moment when I met you. It was about, as you said, about 25 years ago. You probably don't remember it, but I will never forget it because my mentor at American Express, my mentor at Estee Lauder, Jeanette Sarkassian Wagner, used to every so often introduce me to powerful women that she thought it would be good for me to know and to try to emulate. And we met for lunch, and I thought you were just about the most poised, knowledgeable, cool woman I'd ever met, and thought, I want to be just like her. And so the fact that you've invited me here today is so meaningful to me. And I just want to thank you very much for having me here.
Well, thank you, Sally. We appreciate you being here. It's good to see you again. With that, I guess I'll get started. So in your book that many of the folks on the phone today have already read, and I think some folks have gotten new copies today, you share insights from your remarkable career and life. You've worked in both the public and private sectors, including senior positions at 3 multinational corporations, similar to what Marianne mentioned. Can you share with us a bit about your journey?
Thank you so much, Erin. So like most kids, I wanted to do good things in the world. You know, when we're little, we have noble ambitions. And I thought maybe I would be an award-winning journalist or the mayor of my hometown, St. Louis. Excuse me. And so right after college, I worked on Capitol Hill and spent a number of years in government. And I actually found it to be sort of slow and slightly bureaucratic. After many years of working on legislation, my big achievement was turning an or into an and in a piece of legislation. And while the lawyers in the room might find that potentially meaningful, it certainly wasn't gratifying. And so I left government and decided to try business. I have worked for 3 great companies here in New York: American Express, Estee Lauder, and now for the last 17 years, Pfizer. And what I hope to be true is, and that is that if you're in a good public-facing company like yours, you have a great opportunity to have a positive impact and a really constructive footprint in the world. And so I have really loved being in business, and I particularly am grateful for the intersection of my life in business with important civic work.
That's wonderful. And as I was learning more about you, I mean, you've worked with 9 CEOs, in addition to cabinet secretaries, senators, as you mentioned earlier in your career, and other influential leaders. From your perspective, what makes a great leader?
It's such a good question, and one I've given a tremendous amount of thought to. I'm a student of leadership. And as you said, I have worked for 9 CEOs, and they've all been terrific. I mean, they're smart, they're hardworking. As you know, people don't just stumble into the corner office. They got there because they brought their skills and their hard work. But 3 of those CEOs were truly game changers. That would be Ken Chenault when I was at American Express, Leonard Lauder at the Estee Lauder companies, and more recently, my own boss, Albert Bourla, here at Pfizer. And when I stopped and asked myself, what made these 3 different? Why were they game changers, leaders among leaders? And I realized it's because they put as much time and focus and dedication into their communications as they did to anything else. Many leaders and business leaders in particular will focus on finance and sales and inventory. And they might, just at the last minute, pay attention to their public engagement and how they lead and speak and communicate in the world. Those 3 gentlemen that I mentioned all valued communications deeply, and they understood that it's not a soft skill, it's a rock hard competency, and they valued it as such. And so that is really the premise of my book, that it's a mistake to think of communications as a soft skill. And I have 10 chapters, each of which is a simple and clear call to action for how you can have greater impact and be more influential with people.
That's wonderful. What seems simple can often be complex. So communication seems like an excellent cornerstone for success in that area. You're speaking about your chapters. You have a chapter on gratitude. Love that word. A unique topic for a business book. Can you tell us about how you infuse gratitude into your work and personal life?
Sure. And there's lots of chapters that might seem odd for a business book because it's very personal and it's has a lot of memoir in it. And I share a lot of my mistakes and fun experiences along the way. The chapter on gratitude really reflects things I learned at Estee Lauder. And I remember when I arrived there from financial services, I didn't know the beauty editors. I didn't know the important people in the media that were following the company. And Leonard Lauder, who of course is a giant in the field and an icon in the industry, was really kind to take me around and personally introduce me to all of the big beauty editors. And one day we went and saw a mega editor, and she was kind of rude to us. She kept us waiting. When it was our time to go into her office, she sat at her desk and we were sort of left standing. And she gave us short shrift on time. And when we left, Leonard said to me, "Now, don't forget to write her a thank you note." And I thought, what? She was so rude to us. And he said, "No, that's how we roll." And I learned from Leonard that the thank you note wasn't, just sort of a throwaway action. It was how he got people to remember him. It was how, before they had a marketing budget, they could connect and communicate with folks. And so it became something very important to me as well, and has actually morphed into a ritual. So every Sunday, I pull out my box of cards and stationery, and I write a thank you note to maybe 2 or 3 people who I can look in my calendar and see in the past week that these people helped me. They had a really positive difference in my life. So last week, for example, I wrote one to a governor who showed up at an event that I was putting on, and her presence was really meaningful. A second one went to one of our Pfizer board directors who retired. And I wanted to write to her about and thank her for how much I had learned from her. And the last one I sent to someone who's merely simply a friend, but who let me vent for about an hour on a weekend about things that were bugging me. And I appreciated her taking her quiet time to listen to me. And so by doing this, of course, people are usually delighted to receive a thank you note, but it also reminds me of how much I have to feel fortunate about and to feel good about. And it's just a way in which I kind of take inventory of the good things that happened in my life.
I think the impact of a handwritten note will never lose its importance, even with technology. So that's really wonderful and applied to both personal.
Especially with technology.
Yeah, exactly. Even more so, it becomes more
Yeah.
impactful. And to your point, directionally the other way, what you get to benefit and reflecting on it too. So wonderful. In Breaking Through, you share stories about amazing managers, and you've mentioned a couple of them throughout your career. So at Estee Lauder, American Express, and Pfizer. What is your advice on finding mentors and leaning into professional communities?
Yeah, sure. And I did already mention one mentor was Jeanette Sarkassian Wagner. She was terrific. But I think sometimes it's a mistake I find with people that they're looking for that singular mentor in their life. The one person who holds all the answers or who can, magically change the situation. What is more recently, my favorite idea is the concept of peer mentoring. It's much easier to find a set of peers who maybe share the same problems you share, or they're familiar with the context in which you're operating. And I will often, call up one of my peer mentors and say, I'm having this problem. How would you deal with it? And they'll call me and say, gosh, I said this really crazy thing. What should I do now? And so I want to kind of de-risk mentoring and let people know that it can happen at more sort of, a similar level to the level you're at. You don't need to go for the CEO of the biggest company to make it meaningful. And I want to add one other thing, because I think a lot of people kind of get an aversion to networking. They think, oh, it feels false. I don't think of it as that. I think of it as true relationships, real friendships. I find when you ask people for their advice, they feel valued. And so, I hope no one has kind of a negative feeling about trying to build out the circle of people who care about you.
It makes a lot of sense. I think in some ways it can be intimidating, but so rewarding. There's so many events that I look forward to seeing folks because that's the only time I get to see them periodically. So I think not being afraid is a great way to go. This month, we celebrate International Women's Day, which has brought us all here today, as well as Women's History Month. As you think about the important women in your life, is there someone who's had an outsized impact on your life?
So many people, and particularly so many women, have had huge impact on my life. I'm fortunate to have a close circle of friends that I rely on a lot, but I can't pick one if you'll allow me to.
Yeah.
One is my mom. She taught me a lot about how to be resilient in the world. She used to always say, it's not what happens to you in life, it's how you handle it. And when I was growing up and she would say that to me, I'd be so aggravated because I want her to solve my problem. But instead, she taught me how to solve my problems. So I'm very grateful for that. And also for my daughter, Lily. I have a 30-year-old daughter who, will remind me I'm not the boss at home, and, has her own life and her own perspectives and her own views. I am thrilled to have, this love for her and to really be kept humble by my daughter. So those are the two women that come to mind right now when you ask that question.
I love it. I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll turn it over to the questions from the audience. So what does this year's theme of accelerate action, accelerate empowerment mean to you?
I love this theme. It speaks very directly to me. I believe in the importance of being intentional. And in fact, intentionality is the first chapter in my book. And it does go back to something I learned during the time of COVID, which Marianne mentioned in the introduction. At the onset of the pandemic, which, believe it or not, is now about 5 years ago this month, we didn't know what we were facing. And my boss, Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla, said that he was going to make a vaccine in 8 months. And this was a wild notion. I mean, it used to take 12 years to make a vaccine. And by virtue of technology and his leadership and the company's commitment, we did make a vaccine in 8 months. I raised this story because it also spurred me to action. Albert's bold vision made me want to have an equally bold vision. And so during the pandemic, I decided that I was going to, reimagine Pfizer's reputation and to build levels of trust in a company that I know people think of as big pharma. I came to this company because I couldn't believe that people who make life-saving medicine were not loved by society, not loved by a far stretch. And during the pandemic, I sort of sprung to action and did things differently, embedded media into the company as we went through this process. We didn't know how it would end up. Took things that were considered intellectual property and put them onto the website for true, not just transparency, but real candor. The result is today, Pfizer is a leading global brand. We are still now one of Fortune's most admired companies. But it was because, I took action and my team took action, and we decided not to be passive riders and passengers in this experience that the company was going through, but to be super active. So I think as we're celebrating International Women's Day, I think it's this Saturday, and being here with your network, I am passionate that, we need to take accountability for our own lives and to be as proactive as we can. That's where really great results happen.
It's truly remarkable. And so with that, Laura, have you been able to capture some questions from our audience? I'm sure they've got a bunch.
Yes, we have some great questions coming in. The first one I'd like to start with is, would you mind sharing your morning routine with us?
Certainly, although I'm laughing because people who work with me know my morning routine starts really early. I'm a Midwesterner. I've always been early to bed, early to rise. I love to get up, and from my apartment in New York, I can see the sun rise. I find that an incredibly hopeful symbol each morning that, yes, in fact, the sun does rise. I then practically run to the coffee pot and get my first big cup of coffee and sit at the kitchen counter and go through as many news sources as I can. I'm trying to always read different ones and not only read newspapers that agree with me or only listen to podcasts that agree with me. I try to get as much global news as I can. I then go down to the gym and do something that vaguely resembles a workout. Okay. It's mostly kind of walking on the tread, listening to more podcasts and, trying to raise a few weights. And then if I'm super inspired, I will walk to work. Very fortunate to be over in Hudson Yards, and it's not that far from where I live. And if the weather and my footwear will all agree, work with me, I can manage to walk to work. And by the time I get here, I'm feeling very grounded and very centered. And I think finding rituals in the morning, whatever your rituals are, mine, coffee, news, walking, really helps to just create a balance in your life. It's so important.
I love that. I think that's really important, the rituals. I wanted to shift over. You talked about the importance of communication as not just a hard skill, a rock hard skill. So something that a lot of people find rock hard to do is give maybe difficult feedback or hard to hear feedback or share bad news. What advice would you give for those of us that maybe struggle with giving bad feedback?
I think people who are unable or unwilling to give hard, honest feedback are really missing something very important. And maybe the ability to do that, separates the women from the girls in the world, because mature executives do give straight, candid, detail-rich feedback, and know that even though it's a cliche, it is in fact a gift. I remember early in my career, I got some hard to hear feedback. It was in my early days. I was with American Express, and my managers had done a 360. And when the manager says to you, well, all these good things, but here's your developmental opportunity, which is, code word for here comes the real meat of the message. This person told me that my peers felt that I managed up. And I will tell you, I was mortified. I was gutted by this because I didn't want to be that person, who was seen as kissing up to the boss and not being a good colleague. But I'm grateful that I got that message early in my career, because I've worked against it every day since and made sure that, I'm broadly inclusive to my colleagues, and that I don't just, take the good news upstairs to the boss, but share the glory and share the blame. And so I think it's about getting comfortable with the idea that it's not cruel, it's not mean. It is really essential, if you want to see someone grow, to give them tough news. And if you want to be a respected voice in the boardroom, you need to be able to speak truth to power. And it's not easy, but I am sure Marianne does this very, very well. And it is really something that separates between you're good or you're great, is your ability to have those hard conversations. And there's lots of pointers and tips in the book about how to do that in a way that is more impactful. Often start by asking questions. Don't come in hot. Remember, it's not all about you. So I try in breaking through to give a lot of practical examples that I hope help with what I know is really hard, what you're asking about.
That's
Laura,
fantastic.
I saw one that just came through around. Sally, do you ever grapple with imposter syndrome or have any experiences with that over your career that you've had to deal with?
Please say yes,
Uh,
so that my theory is everyone has, so that I don't
I-
have to worry about it. But please tell me that you do too.
I was about to say the exact same thing. I want to meet the person who doesn't have imposter syndrome. Just this week, I had a tremendous opportunity to meet Dame Jacinda Ardern, who was the Prime Minister of New Zealand at age 37. Okay. And she's brilliant and she's beautiful and she's compassionate and she's articulate. And she told me she had imposter syndrome. So, we all have imposter syndrome. And, I think I had an interesting question come my way this morning, which was, do you feel you're lucky that things happen to you? And I think people who have imposter syndrome think they just got lucky. Somehow somebody made a mistake and hired them. The word I prefer is to consider ourselves fortunate. And if we can see ourselves as we've come to a place in life that we're fortunate, maybe you're fortunate to have meaningful work or fortunate to have a loving family, but the fortunate comes from our own investment and realizing it's what we bring to it, not just that we've won the lottery and we are undeserving.
I want to ask you, going back to kind of assertiveness and being able to give direct feedback, how do you balance assertiveness and empathy in your leadership style?
Well, I don't think they're in any way mutually exclusive. Empathy is enormously important. And I appreciate, Laura, that you use the word empathy as opposed to authenticity, because authenticity is sort of overused and, it's become kind of a cliche. Everybody wants to be authentic. And one time I had an executive call me into her office and ask if I could hire a public relations firm for her. And I said, sure, I can, but why? And she goes, I want someone to make me authentic. All right. And, no one can make you authentic and no one can make you empathetic. And being empathetic in the workplace is being human. And so the ability to do those things, to know the names of your colleagues, partners, and kids, and asking them how things are going on a tough day, or taking the time for a cup of coffee, that kind of empathy detracts nothing from our ability to be strong and powerful and forceful when needed. And I think it is a common false trade-off that people have. Well, I can't be nice and be tough. Yes, you can. You can be nice and be tough.
That's good to hear. We'll practice that. You answered about mentorship, and I love this idea of peer networking, and especially for those that are part of this women's network. It's thousands of members in the Americas and globally, as we mentioned in the introduction. So if you're looking for a peer mentor, this is the spot to find it, those that are listening. But something we've been hearing more about is sponsorship. Have you had the benefit of sponsorship, or maybe you could speak to sponsorship for a moment and how we could find sponsors?
Sure. I mean, sponsorship is a wonderful practice where people actually will be quite, firm and persistent in helping someone. Like when my mentor called Marianne Ty and said, she didn't say to me, you should have lunch with Marianne Ty. Well, that's a no-brainer. But she actually called Marianne and said, would you have lunch with Sally? So that kind of proactive work is something that really makes a difference. And rather than ask, how do you get a sponsor? I like to think about, how do I be a sponsor? Because that's something it's more in my control. And so if I have a friend, for example, who's done something meaningful, I will nominate her for an award. If I have a colleague who's done something hard and remarkable, I will raise it in the executive committee room. So what I think is the beauty of sponsorship is that you are, taking the laboring oar for someone else and telling a story about what they did well. I don't think people really feel comfortable tooting their own horn, especially women tend to be, more deferential, or they're not as forthcoming with their successes. But I can be forthcoming with their successes. And I can call someone and say, hey, Laura, if you don't mind, may I introduce you to my friend Elizabeth? And, I think that it gives me great pleasure to be at a place in my life where I can do that, and I want to do that, and I do that. But we can all do it, regardless of how long we've been in the workforce or how senior we are. Taking sponsorship on board as something you want to do for other people is enormously gratifying and has huge impact for the person.
I really like that. I haven't heard that spin to you be the sponsor. It makes me think if you want to get invited to the party, then you should throw the party. And so
Exactly.
all of us, regardless of where we sit in the organization, can speak other people's names and speak of their accomplishments and give them the high fives and help bring visibility to their successes. I like that a lot. Thank you.
Sure.
Erin, I have 10 more questions, but I would like to give you a moment to ask questions too.
There are so many coming in. Why don't you keep going?
Okay.
And I'll keep looking at the ones coming in.
What would you say is the most underrated skill for women in the workplace?
Well, I think this is the most underrated skill for everyone, if you don't mind, and that is to be really good listeners. I work in a large Fortune 50 company, and I don't think anybody's, saying, gosh, we need to go out and get a great listener here in our executive ranks. It's a skill that is not always appreciated, but listening, truly listening, not for rebuttal, but for understanding, can really, I believe, advance your career and shows that you get it and you care enough to learn and to really listen. My boss has a wonderful tradition he does, which is in our meetings, at the end of a meeting, he'll go around and ask each person to weigh in, because there's always people in that meeting who are the talkers, and they're talking the whole time, and they're maybe getting, most of the airtime. And the rest of us who tend to be listeners, like myself, are more quiet. And yet we have good ideas and we have good opinions. And being the kind of leader that wants to make sure you're hearing not just from the extroverts, but from the introverts, and the people who are better listeners, will lead to greater understanding, better analysis, better decision making. So really finding a home in business for the listeners is really important. And if there's anyone who's dialed in here who knows that they're an introvert, there's a wonderful book called Quiet, which I highly recommend that you read, because it talks about the power of being an introvert. So I think listening is a secret superpower that most people don't really practice.
I like that. This year, the theme we've chosen is Be Bold, and we've challenged all of our members this year to take, kind of be a little bit bold and ambitious and set your sights on a really big goal. What advice do you have for people around goal setting?
I would say you're on it, which is, it's go beyond the stretch goal, go to the next level of reach. Again, going back to the COVID experience, I learned that Pfizer would not have been able to find a vaccine if our CEO did not set an outrageously ambitious goal. If he had said, rather than finding a vaccine in 12 years, we'll find one in 6 years, that, we still wouldn't have a vaccine, but also we wouldn't have changed everything, because he said we're going to do it in 8 months. Everything, we had to break all the traditions. We had to crush our hierarchy. It was the pure audacity of the goal that gave us the motivation and provide the innovation to really do things different and have a big, big breakthrough. I apologize for talking about my boss so much, but he's a fascinating guy, and he's Greek, and he often gives us a lot of Greek sayings. So one is relevant, Laura, to your question about, bold ambition. And it's a quote from Aristotle. And the quote is, the problem is not that we aim high and miss. The problem is we aim low and hit. So, a lot of people like to sandbag their goals, or they want to, a target they feel they can reach. That doesn't do anything to inspire you or the people around you. What inspires you and the people around you is to say, we're going to go to the moon. We're going to do this thing that's never been done before. People rally around that kind of bold ambition. So I say, make the goals, the bolder, the better.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
To that, someone had asked a question, if you could maybe speak to a time where you needed to step out of a project and maybe to pivot, to pause, to stop, but when I'm thinking, we're just marching forward and we're hitting these big ambitious goals, or we have these big mandates, we have these big things we're here to accomplish. Sometimes we have to stop. And that feels weird when we're like, no, I got to go. Has there been a time you could share where you had to pause, to stop in order to maybe pivot or to keep going? Did you regret pausing? Did you learn from pausing? Maybe, is there a time you could tell us about that?
It's funny that you should ask me this question, because I have one whole chapter in my book dedicated to the pause. Okay. And taking the time to pause and prepare. I had an experience when I was at Estee Lauder. It was my job to sell to the media and to influencers, the Estee Lauder family, the models, the products. So I was kind of in a sales mentality about all of that. And one day, two journalists from the Wall Street Journal called me and started asking me about me. And before I paused or did any kind of reflection or interrogation, I started answering their questions, because I was, kind of chuffed and excited that they were interested in me. And then as my mouth is going and I wasn't thinking and I hadn't paused, they asked me a question that was, we heard you gave a speech the other day, but that you were struck down by a terrible cramp in your foot and you had to hobble off the stage. And I realized in that moment that I'd been taken for a fool in this moment. The Wall Street Journal wrote a front page story on how women executives were suffering because of pointy shoes. Okay. And I was so humiliated. Here, I was supposed to be, a communications executive, and I couldn't even manage my own press and my own interview. Where had I failed? I had failed because I hadn't taken a pause. And if I had stopped and asked these reporters, well, why are you asking these questions? Or, what is your intention in this work? But I find I make all my big mistakes, and I make many. I make all my big mistakes when I'm rushing, when I'm trying to get from here to there as fast as possible. And so this is a unique question. I don't get it a lot, but I think it's a great one about the power of taking a pause and looking around and getting some context before rushing headlong into something. I also don't wear pointy shoes anymore, by the way.
Well, that was going to be my follow-up question, if we could see your shoes, but I don't think.
Yes, you can see my shoes. They're like this.
Very sensible.
Very sensible.
I like it.
Sally, we know your morning routine. We now know your shoes. Someone came, Catherine in the audience asked if there's any podcasts that you listen to stay motivated and find inspiration.
Absolutely. I love podcasts, and I get a lot of my news that way. A bunch of NPR, First Up. I listen to the New York Times Daily. But this weekend, I listened to a podcast I just loved. It's called Wiser Than Me. And it's Julia Louise Dreyfus. I'm probably saying that wrong. She had Isabella Rossellini on the show, and she interviews women who she says are wiser than her. And I learned all about Isabella Rossellini's farm that she has in Long Island and what it's like to be a grandmother and a working actor. And so I highly recommend that one to folks. Wiser Than Me.
I'm making a long list of to-dos.
Okay. You've got books to read, podcasts to listen to.
I like it. And I'm my pointy shoes. A question that was asked a little bit ago. We've been told, don't think of careers as a ladder. Think of them as a jungle gym, and you might need to move around or over. All progress is good progress, but sometimes it maybe doesn't look like you're moving up, but you're still making movement. Was there ever a time that you took a lateral position to move up and around, or maybe looking back, there was a pivotal moment where you said, like, I have to get off this lane. I need to pivot and move around in my career?
Many times. I love your symbol of a jungle gym, because I think that's often what it feels like. I mentioned earlier that I'd started in government, but then, wanted to make my life in business. I did have an opportunity when President Clinton was elected to go back to government. And I had just been made a vice president at American Express, and I was stepping off of a career there that seemed to have a fair amount of momentum, and took a job that paid less than half of what I was making at the company, going back to Washington and into government. And, I was a little bit scared to do that, but I also have this wonderful feeling whenever I'm scared, I know I'm probably doing something that is a right thing to do. So I went back to Washington. I worked for 2 years at the Department of Commerce for Secretary Ron Brown. And then American Express called me back and hired me into a much more senior role, leading corporate affairs for Europe, based out of London. To this day, Laura, I believe that only happened because I took a zigzag. And probably if I just stayed at American Express, I might not have been on their radar screen in the same way. That's one example. And I'd like, if I have the time, to give a second, which is
Please.
Changing industries. I mean, changing industries is really hard. And going from financial services to beauty products to biopharmaceuticals, each time I did that, I went from a feeling of confidence and expertise to really being a novice and drinking from the fire hose and having to prove myself all over again. So, it was zigzaggy, but it was resilience building and muscle building to force myself into an aggressive state of learning. And so, it also opens up a huge number of possibilities if you can take yourself off a linear path.
So true. And as you build those skills, the world opens exponentially and you have more options. I think it overwhelms people sometimes because before it was very obvious what I was going to do. And now it's anything I want to do. But going back to that, moving from, and Marianne mentioned this in her introduction as well, you've moved industries, but you speak that language fluently. And you just said aggressive learning. How do you get up to speed so quickly in the new industry and in these new roles? And how can we all be better learners?
I believe it starts with asking good questions. There's nothing worse than sitting in a meeting in silence while you don't understand what people are talking about. And having the courage to ask a question, you'd be amazed at how many times when you ask a question, people around the table nod their heads because they didn't know either what somebody was talking about. And, being willing to get mentorship even from someone more junior. As I've tried to tackle AI and become better at using artificial intelligence, I go to the younger people in the company and ask them to explain things to me or show me a demo. And being able to just, be vulnerable and ask questions is very important. I want to share with everyone one of my favorite words, and the word is abecedarian. And it's ABEDECARIAN or something like that. And what it basically means is to be a beginner in all things. And I keep that word abecedarian in my mind because it's great to try new things that you're not very good at. because it gives you experience and skills at trial and error. I took up gardening. I wasn't very good at it, but I learned a lot about a different set of skills. So, seeing ourselves as being beginners and learners and imperfect and having a comfort level with it is so important. It pains me when I see people try to be perfect or try to seem like they know all, because nobody is and no one does. And so being able to see yourself as a work in progress is really important.
Before you mention the word that I'm going to practice before I say it aloud, because I don't know if I've ever heard it before today, I wrote down when you talked about asking questions, I said, well, what about dumb questions? And so maybe that's the antidote for feeling like, oh, I can't ask this because I don't want to look like I don't belong in this room because I don't know what we're talking about. And so how would you handle that where you don't want to look silly or foolish, but it's okay, you want to be vulnerable and present, but maybe it's the word I'm going to learn how to say.
Abecedarian. So it also pains me when I hear people, and particularly women, say, well, this may be a dumb question, but there really is no dumb question if you don't know the answer to it. And if something is not clear, and much of corporate life is not clear, there's corporate speak that just leaves everybody sort of in a state of confusion. I like to keep notes on corporate speak because I think it's funny. So, for example, if someone says, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, it means it's never going to happen. Like, don't even think that might ever happen. Or if somebody says, well, that's a whole new paradigm shift, that means they don't understand it either. And, being plain spoken is very important, and not trying to hide behind big words, and no need to apologize or make excuses for a question. I think it's entirely appropriate to say, if others know this in the room, then I can take it offline, but I'm wondering if. So, you're setting the stage that if everybody else knows the answer, you're not trying to derail a meeting. But I'm willing to place a bet more than 50% of the time when someone poses a question in that vein, there are lots of people in the room who want to know the same answer.
We've worked very hard to remove "I'm sorry" from our vocabulary. And so now that we've all aced that, we're going to now remove "this might be a dumb question, but."
Thank you.
I like how you rephrase that too. I will be using that.
Good.
Are there any books that you would recommend to your younger self? You've already given us a few really good ones.
Well, it's funny you should ask that, because I'm celebrating Women's History Month by every day during the month of March posting a memoir by a woman that I've really loved. So I love stories. I especially love stories by women who've overcome some kind of a hardship or a challenge. And I read a ton of memoirs. And so I've been keeping a list. I have 30 that will be shared over the course of the month. For example, I think I just posted, Cecile Richards wrote a book called Good Trouble. Cecile was a wonderful advocate for women's rights, for pro-choice. She sadly recently passed away. She was given a Presidential Medal of Freedom, and her book is terrific. Another example is Lovely One by Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Jackson Brown. And, these stories really illuminate my life and make me feel not alone. And I wanted to share that with other women. And so, if my LinkedIn, Sally Sussman, is where I'm listing books that I recommend.
I have a feeling your subscribers are going to exponentially shoot up.
Thank you. SUSMAN.
Excellent. I'm just looking back to see, make sure there's so many great questions our folks have put in the chat today. I want to make sure we've gotten to all of them, but now I'm on 3 pages of notes.
Well, one that came through was a question around, do you have any words of wisdom for the audience around forgiveness? I guess forgiveness of yourself or of others?
Sure. And I like what you say, Erin, of forgiveness of ourselves. We've talked during this time about mistakes that we make. And it pains me to think people have sleepless nights or develop anxieties. I mean, we're having an anxiety epidemic. To be forgiving with ourselves is really where we need to start. I did something recently that I was unintentionally exclusive of someone and organized something, and I left somebody out. And I was beating myself up about this. Why did I do this? Was it a subconscious mistake? And I just decided to let it go. And there's a lot out there about the theory of let it go. I believe there's a book out now about let it go. And, this sort of striving always for perfection and taking care of every detail, it will cut your life short. We have to forgive ourselves for our imperfections, for the things that maybe we didn't get done in a given day. And it begins with you. It begins with me. And of course, it's wonderful to forgive others for things, but I'm far more interested in how people can have the confidence and the calm and the composure and the self-reflection to forgive themselves.
I think that's one that sounds easier than it is. How did you learn to practice that and actually do it?
Well, it isn't easy. It does, however, get easier with age. When I think you asked me an earlier question about maybe a book I would have given my younger self. I'll tell you the message I would have given my younger self is worry less. I mean, I worried about everything. Did I say the wrong thing? Did I misstep here or there? And as we age, we realize that we are not judged in a moment. We are judged over time. And that gives us the beauty to do things in a meaningful way. I think it was the civil rights activist Brian Stevenson who said, "We are not the worst thing we ever did." There is always the possibility of redemption, improvement. And that visual and that horizon of ourselves becomes way clearer with age. It's hard to see in our 30s or even our 40s.
Love that saying. I think we've got time for one final question, Sally. So, in the last chapter of Breakthrough, it focuses on seeking harmony and asks the question, why is everyone so angry? Why is harmony important, and what keeps you hopeful about the future?
Oh, thank you so much, Erin, for bringing it back to breaking through my book. And each chapter sort of tries to answer a question. So like you're saying, that last chapter seeks to answer the question, why are we all so angry? I recently saw a poll done by the Edelman Group that they asked people, if you saw someone on the ground and they were hurt, but you thought they were different from you, different politics or different points of view, would you help them? And 30% of the people said yes, they would help a person in need, even if they thought they were different from them, which was horrifying to me because that meant 70% of the people would not help someone. That there's such a callousness in our world right now that you wouldn't help somebody, a fellow citizen on the street. And so I was thinking deeply about that. And, what do we need to do now and in this moment? And I was taken by the words of Adam Grant, the, industrial psychologist and writer, Adam Grant, who talks about harmony, the notion in my book of seeking harmony in the end. And Adam says that harmony is not the same, striking the same note. Harmony is the pleasing arrangement of different sounds. And I believe that for our society to thrive, we need to embrace this notion that we all have different sounds. You may approach your life differently than I approach mine, but your life is every bit as valuable as anyone else's. And, as I said, we need to listen, not for rebuttal, but for understanding. We need to be open to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, you're right and I'm wrong. And we need to have skills, and they are, I believe, rooted in communication skills, listening and sharing of ourselves in ways that can strengthen our fabric of our society, which is, has some phrase right about now. And so I close my book with the notion of seeking harmony, because having good communication skills isn't only about marketing and sales. It's about community building. It's about intimacy. It's about really just being stronger in ourselves and in our ability to care for and love one another. So thank you very much for the opportunity you've given me today. You have been incredibly generous, and I love that you're doing this women's network. I think you and your customers are just so fortunate to have this opportunity, and I'm just really grateful to CBRE for this chance.
And we have a tremendous thank you to you as well. We appreciate you spending some time talking about your book. It sounds like we've got some new people with it in hand, probably in the audience. And we'll get some new, I think it sounds like from Laura, we got some new followers that will come your way as well. We really appreciate the candor and the discussions about the content of your book, as well as your experiences in life. We appreciate it very much. We also appreciate everyone that's in the audience today that's joined, both clients and CBRE folks together, and the rest of the Women's Network. So we have, the International Women's Day is officially on Saturday. This has kind of kicked it off in advance. So there are more opportunities to celebrate over the coming days. So we appreciate everyone's attendance and involvement. And Sally, a huge thank you to you and your team for supporting us on this very special day.
Thank you so much.